Binge the full week of The Ray Taylor Show ad-free over at patreon.com/inspireddisorder.
What you manifest in your mind, you can bring to reality.
Scream 4 is the movie I'm talking about today, obviously. It's not the newest. There's a new one coming out in January of 2022. But I wanted to go back and rewatch each one of the movies in the Scream franchise, review them each week, and this is the final one that is out. This one came out in 2011. I did not see this one. I watched the first three I've seen. The first, obviously, is the classic. It's the best. It's the... maybe it's not the best. Maybe this one might be good too. But I enjoy the franchise as a whole, and I enjoyed Scream 4. Scream 4, even though it came out before this movie I'm going to reference, had a lot of Force Awakens vibes to it, right? It's like a sequel, but it's also kind of a reboot. You still have Sid, you have Dewey, you have Gale. Everybody's back in Woodsboro. First off, this movie, the opening to this movie is like these multiple openings of like girls sitting on a couch, getting the call, do you like scary movies? You want to play a game, whatever. And somebody gets killed. They're talking about how it's weird. And each of these is a different opening to a stab movie. It's actually it's a very interesting opening to this movie, but it's also kind of confusing, which is inherent in the whole meta-ness of the Scream franchise, where it's, it almost gets bogged down by the weight of having to reference everything that had happened before while having all the other references. This one seemed to be a little lighter on the references, which I appreciated. It's, again, directed by Wes Craven, who is no longer, R.I.P. Wes Craven, no longer with us, so he won't be directing the newest one that's coming out. Which that makes me nervous, because I've enjoyed all of these movies so far, even though, aspects of 2 and aspects of Scream 3 aren't necessarily the best, but I still love it. As far as being able to keep everything together and keep this crazy plot and storyline and storytelling structure together is awesome. It's better than most horror movie. It's better than most franchises, let alone most horror movie franchises. They get so fractured and go off the rails so much. Where this one, I feel it maintains it and does a really good job. And this one, they're back in Woodsboro. Sid has written a book about herself, and it's the new hot thing. Gale and Dewey are together. Dewey's the sheriff now of Woodsboro. Gale is a writer, but she's having writer's block. But she's back in Woodsboro. And things are happening. We're also seeing Sid's niece, who's somebody that's part of Sid's family, but's never met Sid, but, has felt because she's related, the fame aspect of what Sid has gone through and what it's been able to give to her life. Also, this one, in a lot of ways, shows kind of this new thing that social media has changed in our culture, where people want to just be famous. People want to just be famous, and to be famous, there's a lot of ways. There's a lot of ways to be famous. I think culturally, especially the way our media handles it, some kids will do just devastatingly horrific things to become famous. They will cause tragedies to become famous, specifically like school shootings, mass shootings. You're also seeing grown adults acting like children out in public in an attempt to gain some sort of support for their ridiculousness. and using that as a way to like get attention so they can ask for money. But yeah, so it's got the layers of, and the killers are back. It's of course the anniversary of the killings, as they always are. Now this town is like, they're famous for this Stab franchise that is, I think by the time this movie is out, is like had 8 or 10 sequels to it, and they talk about how the sequels go off the rails and how they're no longer based on reality because they were getting sued. And so now it's like, they just do whatever they want. But this town is like famous because of this tragedy that's happened there. And they have, the Randy replacements are a set of 2 movie nerds, one of which is constantly live streaming everything. So this is in a reality where live streaming and wireless cameras exist. And then the other one, Rory Culkin, it's just, wearing the glasses. Both super movie nerds. They set up a Stabathon movie marathon of the Stab movies every year. So, of course, while these tragedies are going on, now at like these murders are back in Woodsboro and Woodsboro, they're what better time than to have a movie marathon, which is kind of, it's fun. It's like a fun reality. Like there's new kids, these new high school kids that are, were tangentially introduced through Sid's cousin. And I like them. I like all the actors. I like the kind of twists and turns, and it still has the meta-ness, but it doesn't have the same weight that the previous films do, where it's just like so much reference, so much meta, so much like layers of things on top of things that it just got too heavy. And this one, it feels like they took some of the pressure off to not constantly have these references, even though they do. They have the Randy stand-ins, those guys giving the rules of what like reboots are like and what like legacy sequels are. I don't even think that's a term they use, but I'm pretty sure that's a term for what it is, where it's like a sequel, but it's also a reboot, which this one kind of is. In a lot of ways, it's a reboot of the very first Scream, and even the killers in this movie, surprise spoilers, there are 2, are similarly. I mean, most of them there were 2 killers, I guess, except for there's just one of them. The third one didn't have 2, but they're replicating the first movie, and they're doing it in order to get famous, because they want to, like Sidney has, they want to be famous for surviving a tragedy. So that's their goal, to survive this tragedy. And it's great. I mean, Stewie and Gail are great. I still enjoy them as a couple. I still enjoy their characters. At points you think Gail might be the killer because she is clearly jealous of Sid's success. At one point, Sid was, it was attempted to have her like be framed for these killings that are starting up. Like her rental car was full of photographs covered in blood with a bloody knife. There's a whole thing. Like a lot of the people that like the new deputy who's like super in love with Dewey and apparently went to school with Sid, like that character for a while was kind of a suspect. They're definitely suspicious for the audience member, because that's kind of what boils down for these movies, that like to do a good Scream movie is the kind of the whodunit aspect, where it's like they don't know who the killer or killers are. And this one has like the, smartphones are a thing now. People texting each other, and it's like it's an interesting the changes they have to make because technology has grown and evolved since the first one. I mean, the first one came out in 96. This one came out in 2011. A lot's happened in those, 15 years since the first movie came out. And technology and, being able to implement that in the movie. A little over 4 years ago, I started The Many Faces. It's an ongoing series of abstract ink portraits. Each piece is improvised. Each piece is released daily. Start collecting now. Head on over to inspireddisorder.com/TMF. That stands for The Many Faces. And save yourself 25% when you use coupon code RTS. That stands for The Ray Taylor Show, because that's what you're listening to, and I love you. So I want you to save 25% when you use that coupon code. Head on over to inspireddisorder.com/TMF and use coupon code RTS to save 25% when you start collecting one of over 1,600 original ink paintings. By myself, I made them. Support me. I love you. Back to the show. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun. You get to see Sid and Gale kick ass again, and Dewey, everybody trying to figure out who it is. And even when you think like there's a few times where it threw you off and you thought it's like, oh, it's got to be the annoying guy that just invited himself to this party. And of course, it's like attractive people who are into movies, which is also, kind of the most ridiculous part of it. Like, the super attractive people in high school, those were the outcasts that got into horror movies. Those were the ones. But yeah, it's still great. Still great. Let's see if there's anything I missed here. Live streaming, cousin, two killers. Kind of one of the killers is like almost trying to like make a name for, like trying to give justice to Randy, who didn't survive, but he's like coming back. He's like, and didn't get the girl, right? He's the movie nerd that didn't get the girl. He didn't survive. And like this kid's like, I got the girl. I'm like justice for Randy. I think that was interesting. So if you don't know, spoilers, obviously, that the killer, like the fact that it was, I kind of spotted it. I didn't spot it, but I had a feeling pretty early. Like there were definitely moments where I was like, because you don't know if it's just one killer or two. But for the most part, you knew it couldn't just be her cousin, because there's moments where she, gets attacked. But that's what the great part of this. I mean, the great part of this villain of this franchise is that it's just copycat killers. And it's so easy for the copycats to do what they do because they can just put on a costume, super lightweight, super mass-produced costume, and just commit these murders in the name of copying the original murders. So that it definitely, from like an aspect of the of like horror movies, for being like the Ghostface in this movie is not one person. It's not like just Michael Myers, or it's not just Freddy Krueger, or it's not just Jigsaw. Even though some of those franchises have multiples that have copycats as well. But this one could be anybody. It's just like the idea of anonymity and wanting to kill somebody, but then also being in a reality, this film's reality, where horror movies exist, but also horror movies that are based on like events that happen in there. Like it's the meta-ness of the universe of this movie is almost it's almost self-perpetual. Like you don't need to reference other horror movies anymore when this movie has a movie franchise that was birthed from the events. It's like I enjoy it, like the fact how it's written and it's not so meta heavy. Like it lifts a lot of the weight, a lot of baggage. You don't have to know a lot of the references. But if you followed just this franchise, you'll get you'll get a lot of the references, because a lot of the references are in reference to this actual movie franchise, which I appreciate. It was a fun. Like, I'm actually excited for 5 because the franchise itself really hasn't gone off the rails like most franchises do. Really, I feel like it's still true to the nature of the thing. Now, it's going to be a different director doing this new one, so we'll see. Tonally, we'll see. Just, it's been nice having the same Wes Craven doing all of these 4 films in the franchise, because it's a singular vision. It's, he understands the tone of the movie. He understands all of it. So we'll see. That could be the downside. But I enjoy the franchise. As far as horror movie franchises go, like, this one holds together better than most do, despite the fact that it's like, this postmodern meta commentary on horror movies in general. But not only horror movies, but also like how art influences culture, influences art. In the second Scream 2, there was that conversation where they're like, some of the kids were like, yeah, we need to censor art because it's causing people to do these things. It's like, well, no, people have been doing those. People have been killing each other way before movies were even a thing. Like, movies don't get you in the mood to buy a gun and point it at somebody's skull and pull the trigger. Like, you have to have some internal desire. There has to be an access to the firearms, which sadly is very accessible in this country. Mental health is probably the biggest thing to influence somebody, to contribute to somebody becoming a murderer. But yeah, it's this franchise is not only examining the horror franchise as a genre, or the horror genre, but it's also examining like what responsibility art has in culture and how art can shape culture, but also how art is just a reflection of what our culture is. So it's like a chicken or the egg situation, whereas I think they're two things that, like, you want to be able to argue the definitive answer, and there isn't. It's a symbiotic thing. Like, everything feeds off of everything, and you can't like pin all the blame on a certain thing. You have to understand that access is a thing, and mental health is a thing. Like, there's so many things that would contribute to making somebody want to end a human life. To go to try and formulate the most basic answer, like, we're going to solve this extremely complex situation by just blaming art, is stupid. It's like it's a scapegoat bullshit thing, because Genghis Khan wasn't like inspired by by like the John Wick franchise or Man on Fire. Man on Fire and John Wick are inspired by, actual events. Guns exist and all that. I don't know. Anyway, I've gone down an alleyway. I don't know how I got here. Mentally, I am lost. I've lost my way. But definitely check out Scream 4. I thought it was, out of the franchise, it was one where the second one probably not as good as the first. The third one probably not as good as the second. But the fourth one, similarly to The Force Awakens, was able to tap back into all the things that made the first one great and display it in a way that was fresh and new. So check it out if you get the chance, especially in preparation, I would say, for Scream 5, to see what happens with that. But yeah, check it out. Scream 4. New episodes of The Ray Taylor Show come out every single day. Subscribe on IGTV, YouTube, and everywhere else podcasts are found. Binge the full week ad-free over at patreon.com/inspired disorder. Follow the show on Instagram at Ray Taylor Show. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Peace out.